Welcome everyone to today's webinar. This is an introduction to the grant cycle. My name is David Gates, and I'm the Director of Online Education here at GrantStation, and I'll be your host. Now, here at GrantStation, we are committed to equipping nonprofits with the tools, knowledge, and resources needed to secure funding and sustain their missions. Our curated databases are maintained by a dedicated research team and provide access to high-quality funding opportunities. And now more than ever, having professional grade tools at an affordable cost can make all the difference. To support your work, we're in the midst of our spring sale where you can get a 1-year membership for $199 or a 2-year membership for $299. And I'll drop a link in the chat for that sale shortly. Now, your presenter today is Eric Spioch. Eric is Elevate's Associate Vice President of Specialized Grant Services and has been providing grant writing and fundraising consulting services to nonprofits for almost a decade. In this role, he leads project-based services that leverage Elevate's expertise to meet a wide array of institutional fundraising needs like prospect research, executive coaching, or complex proposal submissions. And today he's going to share his expertise with you and guide you through every stage of the grant cycle. So please welcome Eric Spioch.
Awesome. Thank you so much, David. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us here today. I'm excited to get into this topic with all of you here. Okay, to continue oops, one too many. Quick intro myself. As David said, my name is Eric Spioch. My pronouns are he, him. I've been working at Elevate since 2015 in a variety of different roles, supporting nonprofits in building, growing, or sustaining their institutional fundraising program. In my current role as Associate Vice President, I'm responsible for designing and helping to implement our project-based work, which is really focused on supporting nonprofits with specific fundraising type of needs. I also oversee our webinar department and our Elevate's general learning programs. To quickly touch base on Elevate, we are a comprehensive grant writing firm located in Washington, D.C. and working with a distributed workforce all across the country. We partner with nonprofits to help build and run their grant programs. We have a staff of about 85 and are currently working with around 80 clients all across the U.S., working in a variety of issue areas, subject matter, all kinds of different sizes, big variety of types of clients that we work with. And so we see ourselves as a comprehensive writing and strategy firm, and we offer that expertise through a variety of different service options. For organizations that are in kind of the early stage of their grant program development, we've recently launched what we call our Grants Accelerator project suite that includes some short project-based engagements that are designed for organizations that are just getting started, including things like strategic assessments for a grant program, to designing recommendations, doing sort of limited term prospecting projects, or landscape analyses of the funding landscape that you're working in. We also offer our core services are called our comprehensive grant writing services, which is a retainer-based longer-term engagement that provides kind of the full suite of institutional fundraising support, including funder research, cultivation support, actual grant writing and submission, systems monitoring, including tracking a grant calendar and funder information for all of our clients. Some of our fun data points that we're proud of: in 2024, we worked with 143 different organizations, submitted more than 3,000 LOIs, proposals, and reports, and helped to secure more than $130 million in grant funding. In 2024, we also hit our milestone of raising our $1 billionth for our clients since the organization's founding. Right. So our agenda for today, before we dig into this, I do want to take a second to just address what I am thinking about as the elephant in the room, that there is a lot of uncertainty, concern, and in many cases fear in the nonprofit sector right now, as we're seeing headlines about cuts to funding portfolios, attacks on vulnerable communities, and then threats to the values of diversity, equity, inclusion that I think are core in a lot of nonprofits and nonprofit-serving organizations like Elevate. So given the likely reductions to funding coming from the federal government, we understand that many organizations right now are focusing on their private foundation prospects. So with all that said, I'm really glad that you are here today. While this presentation was designed in more precedented times, I guess, we still see the planning and strategy and best practices that I'm going to talk through today as key to navigating these challenges. It's likely going to be a tough time right at this moment to break into funding for the very first time, as foundations are also navigating uncertainty and change in their landscape, but it definitely won't be impossible. And so my goal is to give you some tools and recommendations for how to do so. As David mentioned, you'll have access to the slides and recording for this webinar after we're done, so no need to worry about taking copious notes and catching every little thing. And we look forward to, talking through things now and you having the resources to be able to follow up on this. Feel free to drop any questions or comments using the question functionality at the bottom of your screen. David's going to help me monitor those, and we do have time set aside at the end for a Q&A. So as we've talked about, this particular webinar is focused on the core components of the grant cycle and how those elements can work together to further your organization's strategic goals. Institutional giving is just one revenue stream within an organization's overall funding stream, and a strong grants program requires organizational buy-in and investment. So regardless of the size or experience levels of your team, these components can be leveraged to create a strategically informed and sustainable foundation for your grant activities. The goal of this is to make sure that you're getting the most value out of all of your efforts. So to get into that, we're first going to talk about the basics and looking at what is the difference between a grant program and grant writing. Why does that matter? Then we're going to spend most of our time digging into the 5 different pillars of the grant program. These are what we consider the different elements of a successful grant program, and we'll talk about what the essential kind of aims or goals of each component is and how they all work together. Finally, as I said, we will finish up with some Q&A. All right, so as we go through the basics of grant program, you will, of course, be considering how you can apply this information to your own work. The most important thing to consider is how your grants program, like any other program within your organization, fits within the broader strategic goals of your organization, how it furthers your mission, how it increases your impact, and how it is based in genuine relationship with and responsiveness to your stakeholders. So with that all in mind, by the end of the session, our goal is for you to be able to identify the pillars of a strong grant program within your own program. And understand the goal of each of these activities, how they relate to each other, so that you can identify the strengths and weaknesses within your current grant program as it relates to your overall strategy. We'll hope that will be able to approach your grants program and fundraising strategy with a plan that's based in goals that are both reasonable and aligned with your organization's goals, and that you'll also be able to identify the systems to help you measure and articulate how funds increase your organization's impact. And lastly, we're hoping that you'll come out of this with some new knowledge about grant systems or a new lens to look at your existing systems to help your own grant processes run more smoothly. Throughout today's session, I'll be sharing some tools and resources that are similar to the tracking systems that we use here at Elevate. All right, so first up, let's take a closer look at what a grant program is and why a grant program matters. I'm going to make some distinctions here about grant writing as an essential component of an overall grants program, but deciding to take the time to build that full-scale program will help you to elevate your grant writing efforts. So what's the difference? Why does it matter? So grant writing is the act of developing and submitting a grant proposal. This grant writing process is time-consuming, it involves a lot of steps, probably a lot of different people, and it is sufficiently complex to need some robust tracking all on its own. Zooming out a little bit from that act, a grant program ensures that your grant writing is aligned with your strategy, it is informed by your stakeholders, and it yields somewhat predictable funding results. Building a grants program includes the ongoing effort to find well-aligned prospects, build relationships with funders, write and submit grants, and report on your impact to funders. We at Elevate kind of like to think about it in a different way, which is that grant writing is kind of like following a recipe. It focuses on preparing a single meal using the ingredients that you have. In comparison, having a grants program is more like knowing how to cook. That includes knowing the best grocery stores in your town, properly stocking your kitchen, learning a lot of different recipes, trying new things, and then following a set system or schedule that fits with your lifestyle. So like all the other programs that your organization runs, your grant program needs to advance your mission. That means that it should support your nonprofit's existing programs. It should include realistic goals based on an understanding of what is feasible, and it should be based on the understanding of the resources that are going to be necessary to deliver your results. By creating a well-designed grant program, you can achieve greater efficiency with your efforts. You can build expertise among your staff, including your program staff, and you can also decrease uncertainty when you're planning for the year. Having a well-defined grant program can also help you to avoid common pitfalls, like pursuing opportunities for programs that do not align with your mission, We think of that as like funding creep or just chasing after funding, or getting into a scenario where you're focusing on quantity of output rather than quality of output. Now, the Strong Grants program consists of 5 pillars or core activities that each play an essential role within the grant cycle and organically informs the other pillars. Enough. I've baited you long enough. Is the reveal of our different pillars. So we have the planning and strategy phase, prospect research, relationship building, grant writing, and then stewardship and reporting for your impact and analysis. A common challenge that I have seen come up for a lot of people is how easy it can be to get caught up in seeing grant writing as the main goal of a grants program. We intentionally did not design this as a flow chart. It's designed as a circle because we don't want to get stuck in a position where you think that writing a perfect proposal is all that it takes to succeed with fundraising. The strength of your grant writing, the likelihood of securing an award, and the long-term rewards of a grant are all connected to every other aspect of the grant cycle. Each of these aspects of the cycle can help you to ensure that every aspect of your work is focused on your real main goal, which is ensuring that you can secure the support to achieve your mission, increase your impact, and be sustainable for those that you serve long term. Okay, let's get started. We're going to go phase by phase or pillar by pillar within the grant cycle here. First up is planning and strategy. This phase helps you to identify what types of prospects you want to find. It helps you to set reasonable fundraising goals and helps you to align your goals with your organization's strategic plan. So during this phase, you examine your organization's desired impact, which should align with the outcomes that your programs measure, as well as the landscape of funding opportunities and your peers to gain a well-informed and objective understanding of what makes your organization unique, as well as your relative strengths and weaknesses in the eyes of funders. When you understand what your organization's identity is and you can articulate its impact, you can start to narrow the field of opportunity. When you identify and contact only the most strategic funders, your time is better spent. And when you understand the field of funding opportunities that are aligned with your organization, you can develop a better understanding of the maximum revenue that you can expect to achieve through institutional funders. And then that can help you to identify or create new opportunities that you might not have otherwise seen. Now, every organization should have some type of strategic plan to guide their work for the fiscal year. This strategic plan outlines the top line goals and helps to guide you towards your long-term vision. In outlining those goals and the objectives that you hope to achieve through your goals, it should also help to outline the activities that you're going to do, the outcomes that you will use to measure whether you have reached your goals or succeeded, the timeline that you're planning to do those things on, and the budget that you need to be able to work to reach those goals. So the common thread that you probably just heard is that every aspect of your strategic plan is about goals. Likewise, a strong grants program should be aligned with these goals and is an essential part of the organization's ability to reach its goals. Within that grant program, you will have your own goals to help guide you towards the organization's overall aims. Without those goals, you don't really know where you're heading, and then it becomes much harder to figure out how you're going to get there. So, what do good grant program goals look like? Here's some examples. I'll just pick a few to read here. Something like securing our first grant award this year, or closing the funding gap for our senior services program, or cultivating 10 new relationships with funders. You'll see that each of these examples is specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, and has a set timeline. What's not readily apparent in just naming the goals here is that these goals are developed through analysis and a deep knowledge of what is possible given the grant landscape and what is most needed for your organization. So thinking about how we get to that point, you know you want some goals. How do you create the best goals for your program? There are many ways to determine what those could be, and so you want to start with your vision and strategic plan. First, consider your vision for the year. Do you want to expand or do something new or different? What types of work would you need to undertake and therefore fund in order to achieve that vision? Does that mean capacity support to invest in a new marketing software program? Or are you undertaking a move to a new location and you need capital funding? Or are you seeking to expand the number of constituents you reach or the geographic reach of your programs? Another lens that you could look through is your budget gaps. Do you have a major funder that is sunsetting or has let you know that they will be tapering off their support, which is going to leave you with an unexpected gap in your funding? Another option is to think about keeping your finger on the pulse of the trends in your region, your issue area, and your community to help to identify opportunities that align with your vision and improve your approach to funders. So, as an example, in 2020 and 21, there was a pretty obvious urgent need to address pandemic-related learning losses for youth, and there was a significant influx of pandemic-related recovery funds. For organizations that were working in youth education at the time, factoring those factors into their grants program planning was essential to say, hey, there's opportunities out there that we should be going for. Another example might be if you have an organization that works in the policy or civic engagement world, thinking about how the impact of election cycles affects you and your peers and the funding that is available in your space. Keeping in mind that what is happening at the sort of exterior factors helps you to see opportunities, gauge the timeliness of your requests, and ensure that your organization is being responsive to the needs on the ground. And then finally, a strong recommendation as an effective approach to this is to undertake a landscape analysis. This analysis helps you to understand who your organization is in relation to your peers, helping to identify your relative strengths and weaknesses, identifying potential funders based on the interest that they have shown in your peers, and provides critical information about the realistic ranges of grant awards that you might be able to expect from these funders. When you have a realistic understanding of what's possible within your current funding landscape, you'll know how your grants program can or cannot meet your organizational funding needs. So in order to do that that landscape analysis, you'll need to start by defining your landscape. We recommend picking between 4 and 10 organizations to analyze and determine how they are similar to or different from your organization and your programming. So when you're thinking about who is a peer, what is an organization that we're similar to, you can think about factors like the issue area that you're working in, the geographic region that you operate in, specific populations that you're working with, something as general as organizational size, maybe organizational approach, thinking about someone who's doing direct service versus an organization that's doing advocacy or organizing. Those are different types of organizations to think about. Then, once you've identified your peers, you can start to get a strong understanding of how you compare to them and what is your sort of unique value add or what your niche is within the landscape. As an example, you might have programs that serve, you might both have programs that serve youth through out of school time programming. But you maybe have a stronger relationship with public schools, whereas a peer or a competitor has stronger relationships with social service organizations in the area. It's a key distinction. Um, in general, funders who are interested in the work of your peers should also be interested in the work that you're doing. So once you've identified your peers, you can start to identify potential funders that are aligned with your work and the potential range of their grants awards. So as you're looking at your peers, some helpful data points to investigate would be things like their average budget size, their average grant size, the number and types of funders that they have, and also thinking broadly beyond grants, maybe think big picture about their revenue streams. Are they supporting their entire program with grants? Are they diversifying with individual donations or corporate sponsorships or fee-for-service type of work? Getting a sense of what is realistic for organizations like you will help you to set realistic goals for yourself. All right. So how do we find that information? There is a wealth of data available through Foundation Directory and GuideStar, which are now both housed under Candid. Starting with Foundation Directory, this is an extraordinary database that provides information on all of the US-based foundations. It has a fee associated with its membership, but it can be accessed for free at many public libraries. Following up is GuideStar. This is another database that is focused on providing information on the tax-exempt organizations that exist, as well as faith-based nonprofits. This is a great source for finding annual reports, for finding tax documents like 990s, where you can see the financial information of all these organizations. You might not be able to get a perfect picture of all of your peers' finances from these sources, but this free tool can definitely help you out to get a starting point. All right, so now we're going to use this landscape analysis to inform the goal setting. Here's an example of what your chart might look like. You'll see that we have an overview of the peers, a list of their existing funders, and then the award amounts that each receives from these funders. This is a great resource to identify areas where it might be useful to dive deeper. For example, if one of your peers receives substantially more than the others from a particular funder, you can do additional research to help figure out why. Maybe there's a strong personal relationship with that funder. Maybe they differentiate themselves with programs that address like a specific aspect of the funder's priorities that warrants getting that larger gift award. Or maybe they reach more of a specific population, something like low-income youth or veterans than their peers do. Once you've laid this all out, you'll also see columns that you can start to use to set goals and track the next steps in those in your process, which are informed by this analysis. This analysis can also help you identify opportunities and gaps based on your organization's strengths and weaknesses. Your goals should be based on your unique identity and niche within the landscape, and they should make the most of your strengths and seek to help address your weaknesses. So some examples of what that looks like in relation to strengths or weaknesses. One example, if you have an organizational strength that is your adult workforce development programming serves more people with greater need than many of our peers, a good grant program goal could be to focus on renewing existing workforce development grants and pursuing at least two new large funding opportunities for that program. It's your highlight, and you want to make sure you're highlighting it in your applications and you're building on your strength. Another goal that builds upon kind of a strength-based focus might be you're looking on securing uh, funding for adult workforce development programming from the city for the first time and exploring at least two new state grants. On the flip side, we could say that for an organization that is looking to support leverage grants to help support an organizational challenge, let's say maybe we have a youth mentoring program that doesn't necessarily stand out amongst the peers. A related grant program goal might be to secure a capacity building grant to improve that program design and evaluation to help it stand apart and help it be better positioned for like program-based funding in the future. So once you have a clearer sense of your goals and you make sure to ground them in any unknowns, outstanding questions, or other organizational needs. So thinking about what those questions could be, some examples, and some open questions or risks. Are you trying to de-emphasize a traditionally important source of funding for your organization? Are you trying something new and untested? Do you need to learn new skills to be able to deliver on the proposed programming that you're putting out there to a funder? Or are you fundraising for a program without a proven track record? All of these things are, not absolute barriers to being able to secure funding, but they're things that you want to make sure that you're considering as you're developing your requests. You also want to make sure that you are asking yourself about the input and resources requested, thinking about the time that it's going to take to develop both materials, proposal materials, but also, the actual program if the funding comes through and if you have the capacity to be able to do that thing. Think about what other resources that you would need, things like training for staff, software, materials, equipment, hardware, like all of that stuff should factor into thinking about the feasibility of building out a request or a strategy based on maybe a specific program or initiative. Ideally, all of these factors go together to help make sure that your fundraising goals are aligned with your total organizational strategy and your capabilities. So next up, now that you have kind of considered all these pieces, you've gathered a lot of the factors about what your needs are, what your limitations are, what's realistic. It's time to try to sit down and set some organizational goals for your grant program. We'd recommend setting between 3 and 5 each year, and would say recommend not just focusing on the dollars. You want to set goals that help your organization raise what it needs to sustain or grow its work. And so what that means is considering goals that are feasible, which means that they're is it possible for us to raise this money from grants alone? The landscape analysis can really help to make sure that you are within a reasonable ballpark. You want to make sure that your goals are mission aligned. Is the grant program goal supporting our mission and our impact goals? If your organization does 75% of its programming in one area and 25% in a different area, it doesn't particularly make sense if all of your fundraising efforts are going to that smaller 25% area, especially if it's maybe already funded. And think about if the goals are sustainable. Is the grant program sustainable and efficient? That doesn't mean you have to say, well, great, if we are successful, we'll be successful for the next 15 years, but just realistic in terms of what your organization's capacity is and how you'd be able to secure and continue the program. So here's an example of how you might situate your goals for a first or second year grant program. While the dollars coming in the door might be a little bit on the lower side, building the habits and processes that strengthen your grant program can help you lay a strong foundation to build on. So as you can see here, key activities like identifying strong prospects and cultivating them or developing new language can help set the stage for future wins that will start to bring in the dollars. Some of the examples here would be saying, we pursued stretch opportunities, which helped us to increase our capacity. We identified dozens of new prospects, many of which are now in the cultivation stage. All right. Now, there's a lot of different pieces to this, and so in many cases, it's helpful to write all the factors that are going to your goal planning. On this slide is the skeleton of a goals and strategy map that Elevate uses with our clients. This is essentially a SWOT chart with a few additional elements that are essential to your fundraising strategy. In addition to strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, this also includes the resources that you have, the expectations that you need to meet, and a summary of the grant program and the proposed strategy based on these strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So by getting aligned on all of these pieces, you can help to develop realistic goals and then plan the strategies to achieve them. All right, I'll take a second to take a drink here. And now we're going to talk about prospecting. So once you have your goals, it's time to build out a prospect pipeline that will help you support advancing progress towards them. Prospect research is the phase in which you will begin building your list of potential funders. There are a lot of different directions that you can go with prospecting and grant applications, and they aren't all right for your organization. You want to make sure that you have a clear picture and plan that will maximize the impact of your time and resources. Planning at the beginning of this is key to charting your course. Okay. Some more definitions. A prospect is a potential funder or source of funding. In this session, we're focusing on grant funding, so we'll mostly be talking about private foundations, corporate foundations, and occasionally government grant opportunities, but you can apply a lot of the principles that we're going to talk about here today to other sources of funding like major donors. Prospecting is the act of identifying, researching, qualifying, and determining next steps to pursue funding from these prospects. You can see that there were several steps just listed in that act there. That's because good prospect research helps to avoid a throwing spaghetti at the wall approach and make sure that you are implementing good strategy by identifying the right funder for the right program at the right time and in the right way. So now that you're ready to begin your prospect research, you want to start by solidifying your understanding of your organization and your needs. You're fundraising for something, so keep those goals that you developed handy. Are you looking to sustain current work, expand into a new area or new types of programming? Are you looking to fill in budget gaps for a program that is underfunded? You need to be specific about where a grant would be most useful. Your organization can have more than one specific need. That's definitely okay. You can have more than one fundraising goal. But that said, everything is not a strategy. You want to think about naming no more than 3 fundraising goals and bucketing your programs or needs as much as possible to help streamline your prospecting in a way that you can follow through on. So once you've clarified what kind of funding you're looking for, then it's time to start to refine and build your criteria for that funding. This is where you can start to develop kind of your wish list. Thinking about things like what size award is going to be worth the investment of your time and will make an impact on your programming. What kind of capacity do you have to submit grant applications and manage awards? For example, if you have only one staff person who's going to be managing all of your grant work part-time, it's not ineffective to build a strategy that will depend on sending out 10 to 15 applications per month. Now, and since you have already clarified what your organization's strengths and or unique value propositions are, you can think more about how you would name that for a funder. What words would a funder use to describe the work that you do? Jot those down and then think about who on your team is best positioned to help make that case. We'll dig into that more in the cultivation section of today's agenda, but just it's helpful to keep in mind at the start of your process, the people that are going to be implementing these different steps. All right. So my prospecting hot take to a degree is that more prospects is not always better. You definitely do want to work on building a list, but the point is to build a list of curated, strong prospects, not 10 pages of long shots. It's important to recognize that not every nonprofit should apply for every type of funding. And as an example, some funders might be hyper-focused on specific things that you just don't do. So organizations that might be broadly in your space could focus on funding nonprofits that have very specific measurable outcomes. If your organization doesn't have the ability to document that metrics, then it's likely not a good idea to pursue funding from that source. Similarly, there might be funders who want to fund direct service work, thinking about programs that, directly support participants or individuals experiencing challenges. And they might not be interested in upstream work that focuses on changing the systems that have that as a symptom. So I already mentioned how you should consider your capacity to draft and submit applications into your prospecting strategy. You should also think about how your capacity will impact your ability to be responsive or reactive to new opportunities that pop up unplanned. If that seems common in your space, if you feel like you're always finding out about something that is due in just a few weeks, then you have to scramble to try to get it together, it might be worth building some flexibility into your plans so that you have the ability to respond quickly when there are fast moving opportunities like that. Ultimately, the goal is to create a concrete prospecting strategy that you can use to inform your work and align on your team's prospecting activities. So here's an example of how your prospecting strategy chart might look. You'll see that this provides an overview of your fundraising strategy and the various types of funders that you're pursuing as part of your grants program. Each type of funder has specific keywords that can help you to identify them, should be funding at least one of your peers, and helps and provides examples of specific funders that exemplify that type of funder. So here we are talking about using, your program name and your design strategy, naming the funders that are interested in this type of work, keywords that they're going to be using, the PRs that they're funding, and then typical funder profiles or specific examples that you found maybe through your landscape analysis. Right. Now that you know what type of organization you want to add to your pipeline, how are we going to find them? We're going to dig into some specific tools in a few minutes, but some general guidance on searching. I like to think of prospecting as a funnel. You want to start by gathering a big list of leads and then winnowing down that group to a short list of well-aligned prospects. So to do that, you can start broad. Make a list of the keywords that you've already compiled, use those, and figure out how to best capture your work and the ways that they are used by different funders and your peers. So you can start by searching all the possible issue areas with the work that you do. That could mean if you're working on education, you could, search for funders that are interested in literacy, funders that are interested in education broadly, that are accepted or that are interested in or high school graduation, that are interested in college enrollment. Think about all of those different similar buckets that as they relate to your work and start by building out lists of funders that are interested in those issue areas. Do the same, and related for your individual program areas. You can also start by identifying well-known and large grant makers in your area as a starting point. And again, reviewing who funds your peers to identify names to build up to get out your starting list. Then we're going to take that list and we're going to narrow it down. As I said, giant list of long shots is not helpful for us. We want to refine that list by evaluating new potential funding opportunities against the qualifiers, such as their mission alignment, geographic location, average grant size, organizational need, their type of deadline, what type of eligibility requirements they have, maybe looking at their previous grantees. What I like to do is in this process is start with my list and do a very basic red, yellow, green review. So take a look at their website. I look to see if there's any things that immediately look like disqualifiers for your organization, things that merit further research, or things that really look strong. Like yes, it looks like there's strong alignment here. Start by giving each of them a red, yellow, green, so that you have a bit of a shorter list to say, okay, we want to go back to all these green ones first. As time allows, maybe we'll look at our yellows. And we're going to take the red ones off the list because we can pretty strongly assume that we're not going to be strong contenders for funding here. We've already highlighted the Foundation Center as a rich resource for funder research. Also want to make sure that we are highlighting our friends over at GrantStation. They provide up-to-date overviews of grant opportunities, in-depth background on funders, and forward-looking analyses on the funding landscape. So absolutely a resource to incorporate into your research. All right, some final prospecting tips for building out that initial list. It's very helpful to build a network by joining working groups, listservs, attending events, signing up for newsletters. As much as many different places as you can find where information about potential funding opportunities are going to be coming in. That's just going to help you with that top of the funnel piece. it's much easier to have opportunities come to you than it is to go search them out. So why not set up some ways for them to happen automatically? That could also include setting up Google alerts for program-specific funding opportunities or prospective funders. You could also think about researching attendee lists for meetings and conferences. If you have a regional conference of nonprofits that are working in a specific area, check out the funders that supported that conference, or check out the funders that were speaking at panels, or whatever that case may be. That's an indication that they are interested in the type of work that you are doing, and a good reason to put them on your list for further research. You can also push out your organization's online campaigns or major news to personal social media just to see what sticks, what type of connections pop up as potential resources. Think about using your LinkedIn. Think about just like all the different sources where you can get that starting point of saying, hey, this is a funder that might be interested in us. We've got a name now. Let's go ahead and do some qualifications and further research. No. As you narrow your prospects to the most strategic new potential funders, the next goal of our prospect research is to identify who to ask, who to engage in that process, how much to ask for, when to ask, and how to ask. Um, this information helps us to start off on the right foot as we build relationships with new funders through cultivation efforts. To track and share the relevant information that you'll need in order to effectively pursue new funders, it's our strong recommendation that you make a prospect research summary for each of your good prospects. This research summary should include information such as contact info, the funder staff and board members, their giving priorities, summary of alignment of your alignment with their priorities, past grantee amounts, the years that this happened, and then the details on the application. By putting all this information into a brief, easy to review format, you have something that you can easily share with your team members or other relevant people in the organization. You'll also have something on hand to reference when some time passes between sending a cultivation email and hopefully setting up a meeting. Whatever the case may be, you'll have something you can easily refer back to during your decision-making process or when you're listing deadlines or need contact information. Another benefit of having a smaller pipeline of well-aligned prospective funders is that it allows you to more effectively forecast the likely funding that your grants program will secure. Um, this is a slightly more in-depth process, but what you can do is outline your potential funders, identify the best amount to request from each funder based on the existing information about what type of awards and what size of awards they give. You can sort of estimate your probability of winning a grant based on factors such as history with them, based on strong alignment, and project a rough calculation of the likely revenue of your entire grant pipeline. So as an example, if you were making a $100,000 request and estimating a 50% probability of winning, big picture long term, that means thinking about $50,000 in expected revenue. This type of forecasting helps you to plan for the uncertainty of losing grants that you didn't expect to lose and win grants that you didn't expect to win. It does require having a slightly more robust pipeline. The math doesn't work out as well if we're talking about 3 or 4 grants, because then it's kind of becomes an all or nothing. But the larger your pipeline is of well aligned prospects and hopefully renewal applications to think about, that's how the math can start to become much more helpful in projecting. Um, as I said, this is a kind of more in-depth process. If this is particularly interesting to you, I will spotlight quickly a blog post that Elevate's CEO wrote a few years back, excuse me, that goes more into depth on preparing a forecast. This is entitled How to Predict the Future, Part 1, includes, and there is Part 2, includes a full guide to forecasting and has a downloadable template that you can use if you want to check it out. This is on Elevate's website. The next step that we're going to talk about is building relationships through cultivation. Your prospect research helps you to understand the points of alignment that support you in building these new relationships with potential funders. In most cases, before we ever write a grant letter of inquiry or proposal, there's several key steps that can help set you up for success. Chief among them is cultivation, which should be informed by your prospect research so that you have a basic understanding of the funder, what they're interested in supporting, and any questions that you want to ask before you cultivate. Then, once we understand what we want to pitch and we know who we want to pitch it to from our research and how they're aligned with us, we're prepared to start cultivating. Cultivation is the process of building relationships with your funders and with your potential funders. Related but slightly different, stewardship is the process of maintaining relationships with funders after receiving funding. These two important elements of the grant cycle are related but have unique characteristics, which we'll talk about later in the presentation here. Backing up a little bit, I think it is worth thinking about the fact that fundraising is not, and fundraising relationship building is not really about money. In kind of basically all cases, it is about our values, the issues and people that we care about, and our hopes for them in the future. When we think about why we cultivate, I like to keep in mind that in Greek, philanthropy literally means love of humanity. And so while the end goal is obviously raising money and fundraising, it's generally not the starting point. Instead, we want to begin by engaging people in conversation about their values, what's important to them, and what their priorities are. Keeping this frame in mind can help you to develop an authentic relationship with a funder and learn how to relate to decision makers. No matter what your background is or what your training is, this is something that you can do, and I think you already know how to do as folks working in the nonprofit space who are passionate about their mission. So with that in mind, let's think about who you're going to cultivate a relationship with. Although foundations are, institutions, they are made up of people. And through your prospect research, you should have identified the best people to champion your cause, any potential connections that you may already have to staff or board members, or any other organization at a potential funder, and who the main points of contact are at that funder. This could include individuals directly working for the foundation. It could include trustees, board members, volunteers, current major donors, or thought leaders in the field. It's really a best case scenario if you're able to identify a warm connection so that you can utilize those connections that already exist between your organization and the potential funder. But it's also okay to think about reaching out cold. And in most cases, if you're doing that, the best person to build a relationship with is the program officer at a foundation. Program officers are staff members who serve as the primary ambassador to grantees, potential grantees, and other stakeholders. They, in most cases, bring issue area experience as well as deep understanding of the program design and nonprofit management. They can be helpful in a really wide range of ways. In general, they are excellent resources to supplement your prospect research and can be advocates for you to the higher ups at a funder. So some things to keep in mind as you think about how you would connect with and talk to a program officer. First of all, you don't need affluent connections. I know that is a little bit more of a traditional aspect of thinking about fundraising and rubbing elbows with folks. When we're talking about foundations, it is literally a program officer's job to talk with grantees and potential grantees. If it helps, you could consider that you are helping them to do their job by presenting them with a great organization to support. You don't need to be a social butterfly to be able to be a successful cultivator. You just need to be good at connecting with people or learn how to be able to do it. Helpful things to keep in mind are just keep in mind your mission. Remember, fundraising is about values and the shared values that you and the funder have. Lastly, if you find cultivation to be awkward because you don't like asking for money, I would strongly recommend that you reframe how you think about the entire setup here. Foundations exist to advance causes, and nonprofits are the ones that do that actual work. You're each bringing different things to the table in this structure, and once you start thinking about funders as partners rather than benefactors, you will feel more comfortable in having these type of conversations where you're talking about what you're bringing to the table and how you're supporting their shared goals. Okay. So here are some of the ways that we can kick off and maintain cultivation. One of the best ways to get a connection is to introduce yourself by email or be introduced by email. So as part of your prospect research, look for champions and connectors that may have connections to a funder and can introduce you. This can include um, people on your board who might know people at the foundation board, people who work at your peer organizations that are funded by the organization and will be willing to write an introduction that says, hi, I really think that you should meet person at XYZ organization. They're doing some really valuable work that I think you'd like to learn about. Cast a wide net, do some power mapping, look at the connections that exist within your broader network, and look to see if you have champions who would be willing to make connections for you. Even if you don't have that warm connection, you can also write effective intro emails that help you get your foot in the door. In some cases, a call might be the best way to do that if there's, accessible information for how to call a specific person at a foundation. If you're at an event or conference and you see somebody who is representing a funder, you could introduce yourself, start a conversation that way. Um, in almost all these instances, the goal is to set up a more formal meeting where you can introduce your work. You should not be making your funding ask in any of these initial conversations. We're talking about just starting that connection, and trying to find an opportunity to later give them more detailed information. As I mentioned, when you're reaching out initially, you're not sending a grant proposal right then. You're not writing a novella to introduce every single aspect of your organization. We're talking about starting a relationship. We're talking about starting a connection. Um, Acknowledging that it can be tough to know what to write or say, and often it can feel like your outreach disappears into a black hole. So, with that in mind, I'm going to share some tips that can help to increase your odds of setting up a meeting, and starting to build a relationship. First, you want to be straightforward, intentional, and concise. Keep your email short and sweet, to the point. Um, Let your recipient know that you are expecting an action or response and would appreciate a response of some type, and what that action is. So something like, "I'd love to set up a meeting. Can we find time to meet via Zoom or whatever in the next 2 weeks?" You want to include a relevant and specific subject line that lets them know that it's not a spam email, that gives them information about this email that has popped up in their inbox. Include a good follow-up strategy, and so that could include, I will be doing X. I'll be in your area in the next 2 weeks, so I will follow up again if I don't hear from you to try to schedule something. Let them know what your follow-up is going to be. You want to include a good timestamp so that you have like a sort of clear map for when you can do that follow-up, when you're asking them to let you know about something, and then obviously include your contact information so that they can get back to you. Ideally, once we have made a connection with the funder, when that cultivation email or that introduction has gone, or phone call has gone well, you now have the opportunity to develop an authentic relationship with that funder and the responsibility to maintain that relationship. So personally, I like to go into every meeting with a plan. What specifically do you hope to achieve during that meeting? In most cases, cultivation is more about listening than it is about pitching. The proposal document that you're going to submit, that is your pitch. Cultivation is really a strong opportunity for you to learn about the funder, at a much deeper level than from their website or from the information that they put out there. And so the goal is that you're building a relationship that is helping you to collaborate, to craft a request together as you hear what they're interested in. You share the work that you're doing that aligns with their interests and answer any questions that they may have about what you're doing. So that looks like listening during funder meetings, sharing information about your program or cause, and then responding to any follow-ups they have. Providing follow-ups to meetings throughout the year or updates on your work so that you stay top of mind for a funder, um, or becoming potentially a resource or a go-to person for that funder. I've definitely worked with organizations who are positioned well where that they do niche work or specific work, and funders know that if they have questions or want to know more about what a specific area is, they can go to this organization and say, "Hey, I saw this thing happening. Like, what are your thoughts on it? What's going on here?" I have one last round of cultivation tips. First, you have to make time for cultivation. It can be challenging. It can be a thing that is very easy to shift down to the bottom of your to-do list as that builds up. So consider breaking up your efforts into a quarterly system of touch points. Um, Make a cultivation plan for each of your top funding prospects. Again, I'm saying top funding prospects here. You don't need to have a super robust plan for every single person you've ever thought about talking to. But if you've got 5 funders that are super well aligned from your prospect research and that you really want to make sure that you're advancing, keep those at the top of your list to make sure that you have a systematic approach to it. Um, be unafraid of following up routinely with those new or potential funders. I think of it as being pleasantly persistent. And follow up to 3 times to emails that don't get responses. If you don't get any response there, maybe think about a different outreach strategy. This is work that you will get better at with practice, and you will also gain confidence from it. Um, Keep in mind that it is a program officer's job to talk to you, and that your organization is doing good work, which you want to share. We're not talking about knocking on doors and immediately just asking for support. We're talking about helping organizations, funding organizations to do their mission. You want to make sure you're listening to funders. It can obviously be tempting to go into a funder conversation and immediately start to tell them about all the great work you're doing, because if they just hear about it, then they'll totally understand. Um, but you want to make sure you're listening and you're understanding what their perspective, what their priorities are, what their goals are, what their strategy is, so that you can use that to inform your work. Also, make sure that you're tracking your progress. You want to keep a sense of how many emails have converted to calls, how many calls have turned into meetings. If the prospect research that you did is lining up, that you're saying this is well aligned, and then you're talking to a funder and they're saying, yes, you are well aligned, you want to make sure that you're reinforcing that type of strategy. So building cultivation takes time. And in addition to being strategic about the how and when, um, and what with your how you're approaching potential funders, that's all going to depend a little bit on the funder. It's going to need to be tweaked on an ad hoc basis. So it'll likely take several attempts at outreach in some cases, and several subsequent conversations before you're like ready to or well positioned to apply for funding. If you have a strong cultivation program, that should help you to be able to develop and submit proposals with a much keener sense of how much the funder is likely to award you, and if you get the award, and you'll benefit from the expertise of your funders to inform your organization's evolution and growth. Um, you should track all of that information in something like a cultivation chart that you can see here that builds onto your prospect pipeline, including next steps that were taken and that you plan to take as part of your relationship building with this potential funder. Okay. Next, we're going to talk about the actual grant writing step and proposal development. We will stay at a higher level for this conversation, but I'm sure you know that both Elevate and GrantStation have additional resources and webinars that will dig into the details of actually sitting down to draft your grant proposal. In most cases, your grant writing or proposal development will be informed by conversations that you've had with funders, whether current or prospective funders. In some cases, such as with those foundations who might actively discourage cultivation or who have just open application calls, you may choose to submit a grant proposal that's informed solely by the research that you were able to gather during your prospecting work. Across the board, most foundation decision makers want to know similar information. They're looking at an organizational overview, your leadership, the purpose of your request, target population, partnerships, work plan, all of this stuff. This information helps them to understand the full picture of an organization and to make decisions about where their resources will have the best impact. Writing for foundations is different than writing an appeal letter. While you do want to appeal to their values, as we've discussed, a grant proposal isn't a pull at the heartstrings kind of document. Instead, it should clearly make the case for what the problem is, what you plan to do about it, and why you are the best organization to do that work. Here's some more information on what funders are usually looking for. A lot of this boils down to funders wanting to know that their funding will advance the goals that you both share. So what that means is that they're looking for projects that have an impact. This can look different in different situations. Some programs may focus on reaching as many students as possible, while others will engage fewer people but have a deeper impact. You want to know what type of program that you're writing for and highlight its strengths and its alignment with your potential funder. Funders also want to know that you understand the population that you are working with or benefiting. Part of that will including data that demonstrates the need, but this should also be complemented by evidence that you have on the ground familiarity with the issue or population. Your proposal should demonstrate that you know what the funder cares about. There's definitely some nuance here. You should not go about redesigning your entire program or how you describe your work to fit a square peg in a round hole, but you should definitely be looking for opportunities to mirror back the language that a funder is using to describe their priorities, as long as it's in a way that is authentic to your work. It can probably be assumed the funders are looking for proposals that are well written, clear, and concise. The way that you talk about your work and the context in which you do your work should be logical. It should be understandable to someone from outside of your organization. If they have to work too hard to understand what it is you do, it increases the likelihood that they will move on to the next application. Stay focused on what you are asking for and avoid going off message in your proposal. Lastly, funders are looking for honesty, not perfection. While you shouldn't air all of your dirty laundry in a proposal, you should be candid and direct about the challenges that you face or the risks assumed in the work and your plans to overcome them. As I mentioned, Elevate has written a lot of grant proposals over the years, so we have plenty of tips on how to make your process as smooth as possible. First, we recommend setting program goals, activities, and a budget at the beginning of the year. This way, you aren't trying to come up with something from scratch for every proposal, and you don't need to report on a different set of metrics or financials for every award that you get. Next, we recommend developing a case statement or some type of standardized language for your program, like 1 or 2 times a year. This way, you will always have a starting point that is relatively recent and speaks to the work that you're doing. Next, organization is absolutely key. You can save yourself a ton of headaches by making sure you have a good system for keeping things organized. At Elevate, we use V1, V2, etc. for clear version control of different draft materials, and we keep folders that organize documents by funder and year so that you can really easily identify the materials that went to a funder. This includes your attachments and especially your budgets. You will absolutely thank yourself when it comes time to write a report, and you can very quickly see the budget that you submitted to a funder. You want to keep track of all of your correspondence with funders, and that includes saving copies of emails so that they aren't only living in someone's inbox. Obviously, staff people change, people leave organizations, and it's a lot trickier to pick up a relationship when all of the email correspondence with the funder was living in someone's inbox that you can no longer access. Um, Lastly, hold on to your submission evidence. Just in case there's some issue, take a screenshot of a submission confirmation page with this timestamp, or hold on to your mailing receipt when you put it in an application. Uh, Never hurts to just really make sure you've covered all your bases, and that if a funder says, "Hey, we never got this proposal," you can say, "Oh, well, I definitely submitted it. Here's where it is." Now, thinking about your prospect pipeline and how it's evolved, the grant calendar is the next step of that pipeline. This calendar should include only the prospects that you've ultimately decided that you are going to apply to or that you were invited to submit an application to, with a summary of essential notes that you've gathered from your conversation with the funders. This is essentially your grant writing plan for a given year. So here's an example of how your grant calendar might look. You'll see this provides a snapshot of the funder that you're planning to apply to, the deadline, the request amount, and notes on your alignment or your specific request strategy. Hopefully you can see how this is flowing from the early steps in the process, as doing solid research during the prospect step enables you to easily summarize these key details. I'd really strongly recommend utilizing your calendar to track only the funders or funding opportunities that you are very likely to actually apply to, as opposed to building a giant list of maybes. Once you have too many deadlines on a calendar that you aren't actually acting upon, it starts to get cluttered, gets harder to read, and suddenly it's not quite as useful. Keep the maybes in your prospecting tracker until you've done the research to properly qualify them and say, yes, we're going to move forward with this one. Let's put it on the calendar. Okay, and our last phase that we're going to talk about here is stewarding relationships. Once you've established a relationship with your funder, when they've supported your work with the grant, it's important to honor that relationship by maintaining it or stewarding it, and then reporting back to them on how their funding was used based on your agreement with them. Regular reporting and evaluation allows you to not only effectively steward your funding relationships, but also ensure that your grants program is on track to meet its goals. In most cases, your funder will not only want to hear from you when it's time to submit a renewal. Good stewarding is a strategy to support your grant program. By keeping in regular contact with your funders, you can ensure that they stay aware of the good work that you're doing, which will support renewal applications and potential increases in grant award amounts. Think about this in personal terms. How do you feel about that friend that you only hear from when they need help moving? At the very least, you want to create a stewardship plan for your top funders, the ones that your organization will be really hurting without. Some options there would be calendaring quarterly touch points of some type, even if it is just an email update. I've seen organizations be very successful with a quarterly funder update email that they send to all of their current funders. It's a really great tool for teeing up conversations and sharing news without feeling like it's, particularly heavy-handed. Really critically, keep track of your reporting deadlines. Those reports are the most formalized part of your stewardship strategy, and you don't want to jeopardize missing or damaging a funder relationship by missing them. Another option is to consider inviting your funders to events that you have. They may not always come, but the invitation is another opportunity to tee up a conversation. Alternatively, if they do come, great win. That's an excellent opportunity for them to see your work in action. They'll keep it in mind when they next read a proposal or a report from you and can really visualize it. Regular stewardship also gives you the opportunity to let your funders know about the challenges that you may be facing. Again, this doesn't mean sharing every single bump in the road, but if you're experiencing significant organization changes like an executive transition, or you're deeply impacted by new legislation or some other external factor, you should let your funders know about it. You don't want the first time that they hear about something that derailed your work to be in a report 6 months later. In many cases, going to a funder and saying, here's a new challenge that we're dealing with and what we plan to do about can actually strengthen your relationship, and in some cases might actually unlock additional funding if an organization, if a funder says, yes, we see what's going on here and we are committed to supporting you in this work. We got another plan here, which is our example of a stewardship plan. For each funder, think about building out a calendar of touch points, including informal updates, invites to events, and required reports. You can also plan to touch base in advance of submitting a renewal request, which can help give you helpful insight into any changes in priorities or strategies that you should incorporate into your request. Right, so a recap of some of those key stewardship tips. Stay in touch and help your funders to see your organization's activities and impact. Share updates on your achievements, awards, new projects. Send invitations to events, activities, or briefings. Communicate progress on your work and challenges that you're facing. Um, Another tip that I would think about is personally forwarding your standard newsletters to them. You can add a very brief note at the top without it being, again, without it seeming particularly heavy-handed. Okay, and that brings us back to the top of the grant cycle. Once your grant program gets going, you will want to regularly assess its successes to recalibrate your goals and activities as needed. Annually and in line with your budgeting work, you should absolutely analyze the data for your grant program. So think about key metrics like the LOIs and grants submitted, the number of reports that you submitted, the dollars that you won, the dollars that you did not win, how many dollars are pending, and especially think about new dollars won. Think about, what are the dollars when we say new is funding from new sources that we didn't have last year. It could be helpful to pull a breakdown of funding for each program so you can get a sense of, is one of our programs much more effective in securing grant funding than other ones? Why do we think that is? How do we replicate that across the board? Keep in mind your cost and expenses that you're devoting to your fundraising work, and look at that in terms of the ROI with the amount of money that you are bringing in. Using that data, you can ask yourself qualitative questions like, did we meet our goals? You can look at identifying what worked or is working. You can say, are we renewing our key funders and are we adding new ones, which should be, in most cases, the basic goal, the very foundational goal of any grants program. You can ask yourself, is this process efficient and sustainable? Did we get through these grant proposals but felt like we were going to keel over after every time we did them? Maybe we need to think about some changes to our structure. Do we have flexibility for new options but not mission creep? Are we striking that balance of we're finding opportunities that are, nicely adjacent to the work that we're doing, but we're not chasing funding that is making us overextend ourselves? You can ask yourself, what do we want to improve for the next year, and how should our strategy change in the coming year based on your overall organizational goals relative to the successes or challenges that you ran into with your grant program? In addition to these questions, I want to share a key industry standard that we find helpful to assess the success of a grant program. The Standards of Excellence defines that a nonprofit's fundraising cost should be reasonable over time, and on average, over a 5-year period, a nonprofit should realize revenues from fundraising that are at least 3 times the amount it spent conducting them. So that 3-to-1 return. Organizations whose fundraising ratio is less than 3-to-1 over a 5-year period should demonstrate that they are making steady progress towards achieving that goal, or should be able to justify why a 3-to-1 ratio is not appropriate for their organization. So in terms of just like a general benchmark to think about, I feel like this is a helpful number to share here. Okay. All right, so let's see. We are now at the end of our session, so we want to take a moment to check in to ask yourself if you better understand the pillars of a strong grants program and how the goals of each of these activities contributes to a fundraising strategy. If you have a better understanding of the basic skills to connect your planning to institutional fundraising strategy, and if you have ideas for how to develop effective tracking systems that can help your own grant writing processes run smoothly. You'll receive a handful of follow-up materials, including templates and resources that I mentioned today in our follow-up email. And David will also share a little bit more information about a follow-up survey where you can provide feedback on this session. I'm going to do a quick just shout out for some more Elevate webinars that are coming up in addition to GrantStation's calendar of learning sessions. We host a variety of webinar sessions. We'll have on March 20th, how to write a general operating grant, and on April 24th, a session on prospect research specifically. So if that was of interest to you, we'll be digging into it much more in a much more detailed way. We are also hosting a conversation series right now that is focused on specifically the uncertainty that is happening with federal funding and in the federal funding environment. The second session in that series is going to be this Thursday on March 6th, entitled Doing Less with Less, and is going to focus on contingency planning and decision making for nonprofit leaders. Information for all of these sessions and webinars is available on Elevate's website. So I have been seeing some pings and notifications for questions and comments, and we'll pivot to David to ask if there's anything that you want me to speak to.
Yeah, there were a few questions in the Q&A that we'll cover right now. One question that was just some clarification when you were talking about kind of setting the objectives. Are organization peers those who do the same work? Like organizations are those that compete for the same funding?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. It's a great question with like a not super straightforward answer. Essentially, you should think about peers across kind of like a variety of different spectrums. So absolutely, if it's an organization that is doing a similar type of work in your area, is a like a very good reference to like look at as a peer. So in most cases, they I guess technically are competing for funding. I kind of shy away from thinking of other nonprofits as competitors in most cases, because I believe that there are resources to go around and that every organization is doing similar work. Even if you're doing similar work, there should be resources from funders to go around to everybody. And you getting an award does not mean that another organization is not going to get an award. But it might also be helpful to think about peers in terms of organizations that are structured similarly, but might do different type of like work in a different issue area. And that could be particularly helpful to look at in terms of that, like, what does a revenue pipeline look like for an organization that is structured the same, in a similar way to us. Let me think of an example. So like maybe a coalition of nonprofits that works together on educational outcomes, and you are a coalition of organizations that works on workforce development or something like that. So looking at just an organization that is structured similarly can be really helpful for saying like, okay, well, what does their revenue profile look like? Are they doing fee for service work? Are they bringing in grants? And you can think a little bit more, obviously not necessarily specifics to the exact funders, but how they're structuring what their revenue looks like.
That makes sense. We do have one tool with GrantStation that is relevant for this as well. I'm going to drop a link for it in the chat. It's called a benchmarker tool. And what this one does is you actually enter in information about your nonprofit, like your size, your area of focus, your age, and there's quite a variety of questions. And then it'll actually tell you what similar organizations are getting in terms of grant funding. So similar organizations of size, so you can kind of use that in the strategy aspect that Eric was talking about. But I just dropped a link for that one. It's a free tool on GrantStation. Another question, is prospecting the same as vetting? And is it realistic to know they are the right funder during the prospecting stage?
Oh, love this. So I would say vetting is a part of prospecting. So I think of prospecting as sort of the full like multi-step process. Vetting should absolutely prospecting really thinking about the outcome of like finding funders that are good fits for your organization. So vetting is something that's going to happen as you are working on narrowing that funnel, and something that you're really going to go in and say, great, we found this name. Top line view seems like they're interested in the type of work that we do. Let's dig deeper for now for this vetting or qualification stage to say, now let's look at the specifics. They say that they're interested in doing and funding this type of intervention in the um, you know, food insecurity space, and we do that exact intervention. So like that is good vetting. Let's like, continue to move this one forward.
Hmm.
I'm looking. I know there's a second part to that question, which is it realistic to know that they are the right funder? Not 100%, no, unfortunately. We're looking to make as many connections as possible in the prospecting stage. Sometimes it does happen where if you get moved to maybe the cultivation stage and say, hey, it seems like we're really aligned. We do this work that is, focused on the type of work that you do. Funder says, oh, actually, we think about it differently, and what we mean is this. So it's not 100%, it's not 100% guarantee, but absolutely something that can be, a good starting point for that conversation.
Hmm. Great. And Joseph asks, how do you get an invitation to a grant that you do not have access to before, such as solicited grants, or I would imagine those that are an invitation to apply?
Yeah. Yeah. So that those are obviously the among the trickiest nuts to
Mm,
crack rather, are the funders who say we do not accept unsolicited applications, and we don't have just like a regular standard open application deadline. And that is where really like leveraging your cultivation efforts is gonna be the thing that helps to get you into the door there. So really, as I said, mapping out your connections, saying, hey, this funder is doing work that is there's funding work that is exactly in line with what we do. Who do we know who can help us get an introduction? Board members, peers, collaborators, staff members, trustees, like anything that anyone who you can just say, hey, would you be willing to send an introduction to this funder for us and say, well, I think that you should talk to this organization. They're doing really valuable work. Um, or if we can't get that connection, thinking about identifying folks who work at the foundation and trying those cold outreach strategies. Um, this is definitely a journey. It's a process that takes some time. And so, the goal for like, oh, we want to make an initial contact, we want to get invited to submit next week is probably not a realistic goal to have. Definitely more of a long-term strategy to say, hey, we're gonna, try to get in touch with this funder, going to try to gather information from them about how they work, what their funding cycles look like, ask questions, build our understanding, and hopefully get to the point where they say, oh, we issue invitations in the spring and the fall. We're fully committed right now, but like let's reconnect. Let's next spring to talk about potentially adding you to the docket for solicitations.
Great advice. Then Jenna says, can you speak more about the quarterly funder email?
Yeah. And this is, as I said, something I've seen be successful with clients, and it's really not anything too wild or in depth or yeah or crazy. Just something as simple as like thinking about something that you would want a funder to know about that happened over the last quarter. So did we have an excuse me, did we have an exciting programmatic win? Did we finish up I don't know, like depending on what your work doing, did we finish up a cohort and say, hey, we want to let you know that our cohort of students finished up here in the spring. Here's some information about what happened. Do you have an event coming up that you can sort of like focus on? I would say just generally think about something that is a hook of some type, is something that you'd like want the funder to know about, and say, hey, just wanted to shoot this your way, let you know that that this is happening. Uh, then you can and then once you've got kind of that frame, you can embed maybe a more specific ask for a funder. So if your stewardship plan says, how we always talk, we'd like to talk to this funder about a renewal. In this quarterly update, we can say, hey, this thing is going on. We think it's very cool. Also, would love to reconnect with you about your plans for the next year and how we and what we're thinking, or whatever the case may be. I would say have something that is standard and information sharing, and then on a case by case basis, you can build out something that is a little more tailored to like what request or information you're wanting to get to a specific funder.
Hmm. And then Hubert says, how can we make grant programming and grant writing be less time consuming?
Yeah, isn't that the question?
Yeah.
Um, I mean, I would say thinking of what is going to help your process be less time consuming is standardization. Um, as I sort of mentioned, if you are in a position where you feel like every time you're writing a proposal, you're sitting down and starting from scratch because like that's something that is obviously contributing to time. And so think about developing that boilerplate language that you know every time you have an application that is saying it says tell us about your organization, your programs. You're like, yeah, I've already written that. Like I can pull
Hmm.
it over to here. I'm gonna make some tweaks to it to be specific to this specific funder, but I don't have to start from scratch again. Um, Kind of expanding upon that, the piece that I mentioned about like having consistent outcomes. You don't want to be in a situation that becomes problematic is if, for one funder, you're saying, oh, we're going to engage with 600 students over the course of this grant period. And then for another funder, you're saying we're going to engage with 300 students over the course of this slightly different grant period. And then every time you're sitting down to either do a proposal or report, you're like, what was the time frame that we used? What was the number that we used? And you're having to like recalculate that every single time. Setting some standard organizational metrics that you're going to use everywhere helps you to very clearly know, like, yes, this is what we always say about our programs, how we measure them.
Hmm.
Um, I guess then the last pitch is just another pitch for organization. Have some folders that have all your common attachments, like your budgets, your 501(c)(3) letter, the things that you know you're going to need every time you are submitting a grant application, so you aren't trying to track them down every single time you're sitting down to apply.
Hmm. Great. Then for forecasting, do you have suggestions for coming up with the probability of winning a grant?
Yeah. So as I said, I would definitely suggest checking out the blog post on Elevate's website about that. The projections definitely, the probability is conservative in most cases. And so uh, when we think about calculating probability, we start by breaking down into like new or renewal funding. And so think about, the probability of securing renewal funding is probably at the like 80 to 90%. In very few cases are we going to actually say 100%, but it's probably like 80 to 90% that the funder who has already supported you and indicated that they're open to supporting you again in the upcoming year, good odds. Um, Funding that is in the brand new category, the probability we would say is like much lower. Probably, 50% might be like starting at a 50%, potentially going lower if we're talking about a cold application where you're just shooting an application in, um, likely at like, maybe in the like 20% category. So thinking about character or sort of characterizing what type of request it is a good starting point for thinking about how like what the different probabilities might be.
Hmm. Great. Yeah, and I dropped a link for that in the chat for everyone, so
Oh,
you can go
lovely,
check out
thank
that
you.
blog post. Samantha asks, in completing the landscape analysis, do you consider whether there are peer organizations that would be great partners? For example, they're doing similar work, so they maybe look for ways to go for some funding together. Do you find that other nonprofits are receptive to those conversations rather than protective of their information?
Yeah, and so yeah, this goes back to my point about kind of the competitor space. I think it is probably more challenging to go to an organization and say, "Hey, let's apply together." That is like a larger ask that then there's like much more kind of intertwined work there. So that is something that I would say probably not recommend unless it's an organization that you like know well, like have strong relationships with, maybe have collaborated with before. I think that, and maybe this is just me on my soapbox. I hope it's not. But have found funders to be, or just not funders, rather, sorry, other organizations to be receptive to the like, hey, we see that you get funding from this organization. We are interested in, making contact with them. Would you be willing to make an introduction? More times than not, I have seen organizations say, yes, I'd be happy to send an email to my program officer, rather than saying, no, they're our funder. It happens sometimes. That's unfortunately just like depends on organizational personality.
Mhm.
But by and large, we like to approach this from an abundance mindset. In very few cases is a funder going to say, "Oh, you know, we're giving out grants, and because we accepted a new grantee into our portfolio, we're kicking somebody else out."
Hmm. Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Then one last question from Audrey. Do you have any advice for writing grants or grant strategies for a young organization that doesn't not yet have any supporting data on outcomes or scope?
Yeah, I mean, I think so writing grants or grant strategy for those young organizations is definitely, built a bit more on the like this is the work that we're planning on doing. And so in most cases, organizations are not getting started. Grant funding is generally not the very first source of funding that organizations get at the beginning of their life cycle. Um, Thinking about the sort of spectrum, a little bit of potential funding sources, foundations are definitely on the like more time intensive, more sophisticated end of the spectrum where they are going to be looking for those things. And so generally, I think I would say at the starting point would be thinking about trying to find funders that are in the like less intensive part of that spectrum. So things like individual donors, maybe smaller family foundations that are not going to be quite as like formalized or institutionalized and asking for like rigid outcome
Hmm.
measurements.
Hmm.
Then I would say once, if you are at a stage where you're kind of in the middle ground of we've done work, but we don't have like a capital E evaluation of all of our work, I think that's okay. And being just making sure that you are clear on how you tell the story of your impact and say, this is the work that we do, this is what it has looked like in previous years and why we find that to be successful. And particularly why we find it to be successful and how that connects to the goals, to the mission, to like the work that we're trying to advance. Just making sure that you're painting that picture as clearly as possible. And so something that would help with that would be thinking about your like theory of change or your logic model and making sure that you can like really clearly articulate that in the absence of maybe some like super hard data.
Visit GrantStation to see our latest online education offerings in the form of live webinars, interactive workshops, and on-demand learning. GrantStation.com.